Donna and I are here on behalf of our board to present the 2018 Out Equal Champion of the Year Award. This is the 20th anniversary of Rent, a musical that would transform the world's connection to our community and brought us stories, transgender, bisexual, HIV positive, and gay and lesbian, to the hearts of thousands of brand new allies, made allies by this beautiful, life-changing theater. And Rent was brought to life by its incomparable, talented, unforgettable star, Anthony Rapp. We would be so proud to be here honoring Anthony this year on the 20th anniversary of Rent, even if that is where the story ended. But it's not. In addition to a successful post-Broadway career, Anthony came forward as a silence breaker. He shared his heartbreaking story of assault during the Me Too movement. And his courage and vulnerability not only held his attacker accountable, but also blazed a trail for all of us to share our own stories and create a new world, a better world for each of us. Please welcome Out Equal 2018 Champion of the Year, the Anthony Rapp.
Looking at us for once instead of for them. La viva
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for that wonderful introduction. Hello. There was a word that he used in his introduction, and it's a word that I've heard several times over the last few months since that story broke at the end of October of last year. And it's the word courage. And it's a word that, honestly, when people have used it to describe this whole moment that I was a part of, never really sort of rang true for me in a certain sense. When I used to think of courage, I thought of stories sort of like the one Scott shared of riding in that slingshot. I think of a moment a year and a half ago when my boyfriend Ken and I were in New Zealand, and we were about to jump off of a bridge in the world's first, the original bungee jump location. You think of those moments, I think, where your heart is in your throat. It's very clear that there's a moment where there's a before and an after. It's all very sort of laid out in front of you. You get to watch the videos of the old ladies who've done it before you. But there's a line of demarcation. Before this moment, it takes courage to do that thing. For what happened, I think, for so many of us in the last few months, it wasn't that clear. Partly because until the women who came forward about Harvey Weinstein, until that story broke, and it wasn't just that the story broke, but that the story had an impact. No one, including myself, who've been a part of these moments of our lives that have in many ways affected us, shaped us, ever thought that anything would happen if we came forward. So there wasn't even the opportunity to think to be courageous about it in some sense. It was literally, there was a world before and a world after, but it took this strange, nebulous not knowing what the consequences would be that for whatever reason, I think there was a tipping point of many factors that led us to the moment of the Harvey story actually making a difference, the many years of other people coming forward, nothing quite happening because of it. Suddenly, and in some ways, I think we have Donald Trump to thank for this, in some ways, because now we can actually do something about someone else other than him. That was now, the people who've been these perpetrators can be held accountable, even when they held great power. Because before that moment, no one thought that standing up to someone with that great a power would ever make a difference. And it was proved wrong. So for myself, it wasn't a large moment of standing at a precipice, heart thumping in my throat. It was a quiet moment, sitting by my window in my apartment in New York City, reading the New York Times, Lupita Nyong'o's story that she shared about her experiences with Harvey Weinstein over the years. Her personal story moved me to the core. And I found myself looking at an opportunity for myself that I would never have imagined would be possible before, of possibly making a difference in the lives of the scores of people over the decades who had been affected by my assaulter. There wasn't any other thought other than that. There was no moment of, yes, I'm going to take this leap, and yes, it will take all this courage. It just had to happen. That's how it seemed to me. Thankfully, I do have, as I mentioned before, my boyfriend Ken, who is a human being who looks at things incredibly clearly. I look at things, you know, I'm an actor. I look at things pretty instinctively, emotionally. So I was like, I have to do this. And he's like, okay, I do believe that, and let's make sure, kind of like that bungee jump, we've got ourselves strapped in, that you've considered all the possible consequences, that you've thought through everything. Because as we all know, it's one thing to be courageous, but if you're courageous in a silly, stupid way, you could literally die in some cases. So I had him by my side. I had the support of my family, the support of my representatives. I did consult a lawyer who gave me the very valuable information that we actually have a lot more power in these situations than we do. So if there are any of you who are yourselves in this room who are thinking about coming forward and or combating the what ifs of all of it, find yourself some really good legal advice, because the fact of the matter is, for too long we've sort of thought a kind of lie that the threat of defamation, the threat of being sued, was more powerful than the reality of the power of the truth that you have to tell your story. I don't mean to be a lawyer giving legal advice, but I just encourage you to find people who can really tell you the absolute truth about your particular situation before you start wondering and wondering and wondering. Get really hard facts and make decisions from there. So armed with all of this, I happened to have a really wonderful friend who was a journalist who I knew would take good care of this story, and I shared the story, and then it happened. All along the way, however, I promise you, there was not a moment where there was ever a question of whether this was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. It just had to happen. I can recognize and appreciate that it seems courageous. I do, and I don't mean to demean or belittle that. At the same time, what I also know is that nothing will change with silence, ever. And I think that it's pretty clear with this kind of organization, Out Equal, visibility is the only thing that has made the difference in our fight for equality for LGBT human beings. I was fortunate enough to work with Larry Kramer, about 25 years ago as a young man, just recently coming out myself. I was in a play of his called The Destiny of Me, and I don't know if any of you in this room ever had the chance to hear him speak or be in the room with him, but literally it was myself in his apartment talking about the play, reading the play, and just being in his presence as a young man coming into myself, coming out, coming of age. I credit so much with a galvanizing force to always lead me to think about the greater good. He never stopped to worry about whether the decisions that he made, for better or for worse, he made enemies, I'm sure, but he never stopped to wonder whether the decisions he made to speak out about injustice, to speak out about silence, to speak out about the people who were not being served, he never stopped to think whether that would have a negative effect on him. He always just simply plunged forward. I wonder sometimes, he probably needed a Ken sometimes in his life to help, temper some of the impulses, just to make sure that he could, well, sometimes you gotta blow things up to put them back together. But it was his forceful, galvanizing presence in my life that led me to come out at a young age in the industry at a time when there were very few of us. But again, it was not there was never a point where I thought, oh, okay, I won't do that. It was. I was fortunate enough to have support from, again, my family and my representatives. No one ever said, don't do that. So I guess I feel fortunate that I didn't have a lot of adversity thrust upon me. I didn't have people saying, don't do this, be careful. Maybe that's all the path that led me to this moment last fall when I chose to speak out, and it had, the kind of impact that it had. But it feels like a culmination of events that was a kind of inevitability. And what I would like to hopefully encourage those of you who are in this room to think about in terms of this is, again, it's not necessarily these big moments. You know, earlier you shared a story about being in the room, having that thumping heart feeling. That was clearly a moment of courage. But I would argue it's also these smaller moments where it's not so self-evident that that's what it takes. It could be a moment where you're in your break room at your office and somebody's saying some stuff that, you know, sits a little wrong in your gut, and you have an opportunity to speak up and address it or not. You could argue that that takes a certain amount of courage. It could be hearing, you know, some conversation. I play people who work in companies, but I've never really worked in a company, so I don't know exactly how these things happen. But, you know, some meeting in a boardroom where policies are being discussed, and there's a nuance that you can recognize, or something in your gut that you can tell is missing, but maybe you fear or feel that you're not empowered enough to directly address it. I encourage you to listen to that gut and take that step anyway. Whether or not, again, that it's like right there in front of your face, if this thing that is in your gut can be your guide to make the choice that can make the difference. I don't believe that I would have any sense of that being a part of my life also, and I want to take this moment publicly to thank my mother, my late mother, who was a single mother of 3. She was a nurse. She was the eldest of 13 children. She had a really hard life growing up, as you can imagine, in that, you know, she was born in 1941, 13 kids in 1941, working class family. It was really hard. She never visited any of that hardship on us. She always led quietly and nobly with the sense of right and wrong and justice and injustice, without like lecturing us or instilling us. There's not like I have memory of like strong moments where she sat us down and talked us through. It was more by how she led by example. When I was a very young child, I was in a car with my family. We were driving on a highway. There was somebody who tried to knock us off the road. She had a weird feeling about it. My dad was driving. She was not driving. She was like, I don't feel good about this. And he was like, maybe they're trying to tell us something, we should pull over. And she said, no. It turned out that person knocking people off the road was knocking people off the road and killing them. She later became a star eyewitness in their trial. This was a quiet, unassuming nurse, mother of 3, doing this. Again, there would never have been a moment of her life where she would have said, no, I'm not going to be part of this. I know that this is right, and I will do this no matter what. She later became a nurse in prisons and treated every person that she took care of with dignity and respect, and never had any issues where they were mistreated her or anything like that. So that was the kind of values that I was instilled with and that have carried me through all these years. So if there's anything that I have done to deserve this, it's entirely because of the example that my mother set. And I so wish that she could be here to witness this moment, because I think she'd be incredibly proud. Before she passed away, I was able to tell her and share with her that my life's work, as well as the sort of the fun acting showbiz stuff that I do, was about trying to make the world a better place for LGBT people. And I'm very honored and proud to say that this is one of those culminating moments that proves that my life's work is coming forward. And thank you very much for that. None of this would have happened in these last few months, again, if people hadn't sort of dared to believe that something would be possible that had never been thought possible. I think we are living in a new world. There's an amazing opportunity to make all sorts of changes in all sorts of cultures. It's easy for me as part of showbiz. We got a lot of spotlight shining on us. You know, there have been so many people in the media who are being, you know, called out and having to face the consequences of their actions. We wonder, some of us in these circles, is it filtering down to the greater communities? And all of you who are working in companies, I hope that you are finding ways to make your workplaces safer for you in every single way. I know that the work you're doing on behalf of LGBT people is part of that work, and I hope that this work of the movement of Me Too and everything, there's so much crossover. I hope that you will continue to do the right thing in every moment that you have the opportunity to do so. And thank you very much for your honoring me tonight. Thank you.